Senator Lutchmedial.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have been asked to come here today to debate a motion to increase the debt ceiling and the ability of the government to borrow under the Development Loans Act. And Mr. President, just for the benefit of those who might just be tuning in, I'll just recap briefly that from 2015 to present, that ceiling under this particular, which is just one of different types of facilities available to the government to borrow, has moved from 30 billion to 45 billion to 55 billion to 65 billion in 2021. And now we are being asked to raise it to 75 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. So an additional $10 billion in the form of a facility and the ability to borrow domestically or externally is what the government is here. And every single speaker, and coming low down in the batting lineup, is difficult because a lot has already been said, but every single speaker has really focused on two major points. What is the money going to be used for, and how is the government going to repay this debt if it is that they incurred? And up to now, apart from the election gimmickry plans rolled out by the Minister of Works and Transport, who apparently didn't get the memo that it's a secret what they plan to use the money for, no one has really outlined a development plan for this country that this government can really speak about. And that is what borrowing under this act is about. It is financing general development of Trinidad and Tobago. So they have come here. I don't think that they understand what development is. Development, you have to either solve an existing problem or you have to create opportunities for citizens to uplift themselves and to create a better standard of life for the people who live in this country, and on whose behalf you are asking for the ability to borrow this money. Because you are not borrowing it for yourself, you are borrowing it on behalf of someone else, and it must be for their benefit. But not one single real solid plan for development has actually been discussed here today. Let us look at every aspect of life in Trinidad and Tobago. After all of the borrowing and all of the expenditure that has taken place over the last 8 years, I think it's something like, what, 500 million that they have already, billion, 500 billion that has already been spent. Which sector can you point to that has shown real development? It's not the energy sector. It is not the education sector. It is certainly not infrastructure. It is not in social services. Well, it is most certainly and definitely not in national security. So where has the development been for the last 8 years? Now you are coming to ask for additional money for development. Well, if you go to a bank as a regular person and you ask to be pre-approved, because that's what this is like. This is like the pre-approval process. I'm sure many people went through it. You ask to be pre-approved for a loan for your business or pre-approved for a mortgage or something like that. Wouldn't they look at your history? And that's what every single speaker, I know it gets to them after a while. They can't listen, they can't take it, you know. When we talk about our track record and then we show all of the failures and all the mismanagement and wastage and expenditure and cost overruns over the last 8 years, it bothers them, so they've started objecting now and so on. But we are looking at your history because you are asking us to pre-approve you for additional borrowing. And in the same process that any individual approaching a financial institution would go through, that's what you have come here to do today. And you cannot show a real track record that is deserving of an additional facility. The Minister of Works and Transport says everybody's borrow. No, everybody would like to borrow. Not everybody should be entitled to borrow. Those who are entitled to borrow are those who can make good use of the money and for the purpose that it is there for, and who have a plan, a real plan about how they are going to repay it. Because if you approach any financial institution as an individual and you look like you have a good idea and a good plan, or you have grand ideas and you want to borrow, or you have an ambition, They will say that's all well and good, but do you have a real plan about your repayment? And that has been completely lacking in this debate. And the reason it is really lacking, Mr. President, is because we have not seen, with all of the money spent and all of the money borrowed by this government over the last 8 years, we haven't really seen that they have devoted a lot of their plans and their development and invested that money in ways that can improve their revenue generation. And without doing that, then all you're doing is just incurring additional debt, but you're not really putting that money towards things that can improve your revenue generation. And as I said before, development must either show that you're targeting an existing problem, trying to eliminate it, or you're doing something to improve the standard of life of citizens. So we ask again, and Senator John spoke about empathy and the UNC administration and our plans and policies, how it was, a lot of it is rooted in empathy. And I asked them today if they can't find some empathy and tell us, if you are asking us to give you the ability to borrow an additional $10 billion, at least tell us how you will save the lives and prevent the slaughter of innocent children. How will you give children access to schools when the roads leading to and from their homes are crumbling and are almost impassable? How will it keep the children safe when they do get into a school and they see violence, because every single day violence erupting amongst children in schools? How will it help alleviate the suffering of those who cannot afford access to private health care and they depend on the public health care system solely? Are you going to build more health centers in rural communities? Are you going to upgrade the existing facilities? Are you going to offer better primary health care? Under the UNC administration, we insisted on longer opening hours for our primary health care centers, because we recognize that when somebody gets sick in a rural community, traveling from a rural community to a major health facility in the city or the town or having access to something right in your community is the difference between life and death. And that is development. So my contribution is to try to educate this uncaring government about what is development, because they don't seem to understand what development is. We are not simply here to criticize them for wanting to increase our borrowing limit. We are here to criticize their track record of what they have done when they have the ability to borrow. And we ask again, are you going to build new sporting facilities? Not a waste of money, Skinner Park, where you can't even play an intercall match, while Mani Ramjan Stadium is falling down and cannot be used. That is development to them. But I don't think anybody else sees it as development. Are you going to offer more services through community centers that will be a viable option to keep people away from a life of crime? No one has talked about that. So what we are criticizing them for is for the $500 million and raising the borrowing limit 4 times and having absolutely nothing to show for it. What has this government built except Alize House? What have they built? Seriously, what have you? I remember recently I was talking to a citizen, and he was saying, at least under the Manning administration, you could look at the Hyatt, you could look at, they had some things to show for the development. Well, UNC, we had to spend the whole night here to talk about all the things that we have built. If you go back to the Pandey administration, the Kamala Prasad administration, we can't even finish talking about all the things that we have built. But what have they built? They cut ribbon for standpipe, mailbox, and I think they put up some billboard. Apart from that, nothing to show real development in this country. So when they come here now and they try to pass this off as a run-of-the-mill type of motion that will just give them a facility, we are saying to them, borrowing is not a bad thing. And I think it was the Minister of Works trying to say that, look, we are talking about borrowing as a bad thing. Borrowing will not be a bad thing if you spend it on real development, if you spend it on the creation of jobs, if you spend it on the creation of new revenue streams. Every budget debate we go through, we have a whole conversation about diversification. How will additional borrowing and expenditure help with our efforts towards diversification? We're going to move from one boat to two boats? What is the plan? I would be happy if the Minister of Tourism, instead of putting up one boat, could put up two boats. But tell us how you plan to attract more tourists and more cruise lines to come to Trinidad and Tobago, because we are trying to diversify and build our tourism sector. But you cannot tell us that, because nobody can point to any real successful diversification effort in this country in the last 8 years. Nothing. So we have to look at revenue generation plans, not just incurring this debt. And without proper revenue generation plans, then they are just filling gaps in their fiscal policies. They are not really trying to increase the revenue, but this is really, and I think one of my colleagues said it, this is a borrow and tax government. If it's not borrowing money, it's finding ways to impose taxes. But creation of revenue has escaped them. Now, I want to make mention of one thing, because I think the Minister of, and this comes to the second part of the argument, when we deal with the repayment and we deal with accounting for your expenditure, the Minister, in piloting the motion, said that they incurred a lot of debt during COVID to protect the most vulnerable in society. Mr. President, COVID spending remains a serious question mark hanging over the head of this government. And that is because during the COVID pandemic, and these things are well documented and highlighted in reports from the Auditor General and so on, but we have to remind this population that apart from the $1.87 billion, which was withdrawn from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund during the COVID period, $150 million was borrowed from the CAF. The government had loan agreements with the Inter-American Development Bank.
Senator, you would notice, that one second Minister of Finance, that Senator Gopi Singh would have gone through what was borrowed from various entities. As I've reiterated to him, we've heard about what was built, what wasn't built, and throughout the course of the start of this debate, we've heard about answering the question, what are you going to use the money for? I understand the difficulty at the position that you're coming in, and any other speakers that wish to come. The question is, there's money to be borrowed. That's what the motion is about. And at this point in time, I really have to ask senators to bring information that's new or come with some angle that we have not yet heard. But it's going to be difficult. I understand that. Please continue and try your best.
Yes. Mr. President, thank you. I'm guided. I am focusing on the COVID period specifically and the amount of assistance that Trinidad and Tobago received and the amount of borrowing that we did during that COVID period specifically to deal with the COVID pandemic, which by and large is unaccounted for. They talk about they created things, we protect the vulnerable, we buy vaccines, whatever, but an actual proper audit of how all of that money was spent is needed. And again, we have to look at this government before you can ask us to give you permission to borrow additional money. We have to look at your track record of accountability. That is what we are here for. We are here to hold the government to account and to ask them to account. And if they cannot do that, then they cannot, in good conscience, ask anybody to give us permission, to give them permission to borrow more money. And I want to point out that there was in the Auditor General's report that they talked about $100,000 donated by the Republic of Korea, not reflected on statements provided by the Ministry of Health. So that's just one example of many examples of irregularities and a lack of accountability when it comes to that COVID period and the amount of money that was spent. That is all we could ask, where the money has gone, and that's what everybody has to ask, because the examples are all around us of the money. Because you have borrowed, you have received donations, you have done so many things, and you talk about the fact in piloting this motion about incurring debt for COVID, and you have not properly accounted to the population for that type of expenditure. Those some of those loans and grants that we got through CAFA and all of the other, and IMF and loans and so on, were very specific for certain things. And for example, one of the IDB loans specifically dealt with housing, and I heard that one of the ministers talked about they were going to revitalize housing. Well, you're saying now that you want to borrow additional money because you want to put money into housing. Can you account for how the expenditure, for all of the expenditure from that IDB loan that specifically identified housing? So you have grants and you have loans and you have all of these other things done during the COVID-19 period, which we still don't have proper accountability for, but yet you are asking for permission to borrow more. Mr. President, on the eve of the 2020 general election, we were hearing about all kinds of grants. And I want to refer specifically to some of the grants given out by this government during that COVID-19 period. I sit on the JSC for Finance and Legal Affairs, and we had a particular session that was very, very, very illuminating, because we heard about people accessing grants for entrepreneurial relief grants. Entrepreneurial relief grant, that is what the program administered by these special purpose companies, by NEDCO and others. And you hear about people getting grants who don't have a registered business, who don't have any proof of BIR registration, and grants were shared out. When? June, July, early August 2020. And that is the fair, and that is why nobody trusts this government, because we see the track record. Because the fair is, and everyone knows it, and it is the elephant in the room, that what they want is the ability to borrow money to spend for an election. Exactly. And that is the bottom line, and that is why we have to come here and ask the hard questions about accountability and ask them to be more accountable to the Parliament when they have, about what they have already borrowed and what they have already received. Because they turned COVID grants and COVID assistance and all of those things into election gimmicks. Yes. That's what they did. So raising the debt ceiling, Mr. President, without clear and development-oriented outcomes just means that you're incurring debt and you're accessing money that you can spend without accountability. It essentially underscores, because they cannot even present their plans for how they wish to borrow money and how they wish to spend it, it really underscores, they vexed us for asking, but it underscores the fact that they have not taken effective measures to really boost revenue generation, because the only way that they can talk about development is by borrowing or by increasing taxes on an already beleaguered population. So in 2022, the minister boasted that there was an uptick in revenue through no, real strategy of his and so on, but we had something like an energy windfall. Well, how was that energy windfall managed? What did we do? I think the minister was boasting, I remember, in the midterm review in 2022 about the fact that we had no longer had a deficit as projected, but we had now, we have this big windfall from energy and so on. Have you really accounted for how that money has been used, but you're coming to raise the debt ceiling again? It doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense to us. And the reason why it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense to most of the population, and why most of the population is really going to be against, and when you talk to everybody on the street and you try to get their opinion on what it means for a government to borrow some more, and if it is for development of trying to go, people are against it, because what does development look like under a PNM administration? Let us judge them not just on their track record, but what they have said here today. And so I'll respond to a couple of things raised by them today. They are boasting about how a drainage plan and a highway network and coastal protection, after the Manzanilla Road washed away in a flood, they spent $14 million on a bypass road, and within 2 months after opening that bypass road, it was looking like an obstacle course. If you fell into one of those potholes in the Manzanilla bypass road, you could end up in Maracas. That is development, PNM style. Minister Sinanan, in his contribution, boasting about development Because on the port of Spain, we moved from 298,000 containers roughly up to 317,000 containers. But you know what he doesn't tell you? He doesn't tell you that the scanners on the port were not working for a long period of time. They only had one fixed scanner and no mobile scanners. And according to the evidence given to a joint select committee of the parliament, only 3,998 containers out of 23,000 containers, less than 20%, were scanned during the year 2022. And that is why every criminal in this country now has a high-powered weapon to go and commit massacre, not murder, massacre in this country. So that is what development looks like for them. Thousands more containers coming in and we're scanning none. So we're not looking for the drugs, we're not looking for the guns, we're allowing citizens to die, but we are patting ourselves on the back because more containers coming in the country, left unchecked to ruin the lives of young innocent children in this country. That is development, PNM style. They think that development is a $132 million car park for the hospital in San Fernando, so that when your relatives are in the hospital and you have to run back and forth because you have to go and buy the medication privately for them, there's none in the hospital. You have to go when the doctors order certain types of tests, you can't get it done in the hospital. You're going on a waiting list and saying that the machine breaks down and we don't know when you're going to get it. And to save their life, you have to pick them up and carry them to get it done privately and then bring them back to see the doctor through the hospital. You could park your car for $8 an hour or $60 a day. That is development, PNM style. Dr. Gopi Singh talked about the WGTL project. Development PNM style is making sure that after we borrow that $950 million that we had to pay interest for against the man who was accused of breaching his fiduciary duty to Petrotrin. That is development PNM style, and that's how they spend money. The Minister of Foreign Affairs went through certain aspects of what he considers to be the development and the PNM's contribution to the development of this country. So he identified social services and the social safety net. Today we sat here and we listened to the numbers, growing numbers of the homeless population in this country, and I am 100% sure that those numbers do not include the migrant population who are hiding and dodging from the authorities, because most of them were allowed to enter here illegally through the lack of protection of our borders by this government. But they are probably not included in those very high numbers of the homeless population. Every single bank, pharmacy, along, mostly towards the entrance of residential areas that you drive through now, you see persons, mothers with babies in their hands. I was downstairs trying to have a meal and listening, and I heard Senator Lizama Leasing talking about how responsible government and responsible expenditure, and criticizing, and of all the things the senator chose to criticize, she singled out the milk grant given by the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa to mothers.
Shame.
Well, I have never felt so ashamed in my life that somebody could make, because you know what the senator said? The senator said that we gave a grant to encourage people to make children to access a milk grant.
Oh, gosh. Shame.
Wow.
Last week we celebrated International Women's Day and the role of women and how to support women who are also mothers, to balance their family life and so on. And to listen to a female senator make such a degrading and demeaning statement about women today is really a disgrace. Because apparently, while talking about some kind of special milk that, she could have bought for her children, she's disparaging people who would want to access a baby milk grant. But you see, they don't understand that not everybody could benefit from a PNM slush fund scholarship. Right? But there are some people who never benefited from those kinds of benefits, right? But what they are trying to do is ensure proper nutrition for their government, and real development is focusing on the development of babies in the first year of their life. Because real development is making making sure that they are healthier, because then you relieve the burden on the primary healthcare system going forward. Everybody in the whole world knows that. That is why there is so much focus on infant mortality. The World Health Organization will tell you 45% of infant deaths is as a result of poor nutrition. And Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, not just because she's intelligent, but because she also has empathy, would have introduced a social safety net type measure like a milk grant. And they have the audacity to come here today after cutting grants left, right, and center to identify that grant of all the ones that you could identify.
And them children go pass the exam, they wouldn't fail.
Right. The minister goes on, so that is development for them, not tackling poor nutrition in infants, so that you can tackle the scourge of NCDs and so on later on in life and save money in the health center, but criticizing Kamala Prasad-Bissessar for a milk grant. He mentioned digitalization. Development for them is removing access to digital technology from children who you should be training from the age of 11 years and making sure there's equity. That is a concept that they don't understand, you know. They don't understand the concept that development is for everybody. They think development is only for friend, family, and financiers. They don't realize that every child in every rural community in Trinidad and Tobago who could have gotten a laptop in their hand at 11 years old when they wrote SCA and went into secondary school, that is how you do development, and that's how you do it properly. You don't wait for COVID to come, shut down all the schools, and then have thousands of children with no access to online learning. That is not development. Right? They talked about what? Oh, youth development. Oh boy. Well, the youth development plan that they have come up with with the explosion of school violence is to take the children and put them in MILAT. There's evidence all over the world that those type of military-led interventions do not work, and that more children actually turn out to get involved in criminal activity and so on when they are forced into programs like that. But that is their idea of youth development. And then, of course, housing. Well, boy, housing. Development to me is 100 houses a week being delivered and people getting keys in their hand. Development, and I want to acknowledge the efforts of Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial, who executed those projects with impeccable efficiency. Right? Impeccable efficiency. That is UNC development. You know what is PNM development in the housing sector? Terrestrial. $100 million project stalled because defects. They boasted that they were going to get the contractor to fix it. They're going to enforce all of the provisions under the contract. Now, afterwards, when they had to start refunding people their deposits because they cannot occupy the houses, they backpedal now and say the HDC will now have to explore their legal options, but they're going to try to fix it. And you know what is the biggest part of that development under the PNM? The contractor responsible for the defective work and the defunct project at Terrestrial continues to get contracts under the Ministry of Works and Transport. So the Minister of Works, who outlined how he planned to spend the $10 billion, apparently a good portion of that might very well end up in the pocket of the same person who refuses to remedy all of the defects in the $100 million stalled HDC housing project, whilst this government boasts about development in the housing sector. So, Mr. President, to summarize, this administration has added in the last 8 years, in terms of the debt ceiling, they have grown that debt ceiling and the ability to borrow more than every administration in this country's history put together under this particular Development Loans Act. They are continuing to borrow money and they are continuing to spend, and the people of this country are seeing no material benefits from all of this expenditure, yet we and our children and our grandchildren are inheriting the debt based on the poor decisions and the poor management of this particular government. They are being saddled and chained with public debt that they continue to increase, and the only way I could really see us coming up, the only plan that I have, that I could put forward to make any of this debt, to deal with it, to have proper repayment plans, to see real development under development loans that we can take in this country, is to remove the PNM from government altogether. That is the only answer, please, Mr. Mr. President. And whilst they are here talking about all of the, and they want to talk about the different ways in which they can thing, and it's not really borrowing, it's a simple, it's a simple motion that, is run of the mill and all of that. The population sees what you are doing. The population knows what the plans are. I again think the Minister of Works and Transport let the cat out of the bag, because he has made it very clear that what they intend to do now is to run up a whole set of debt to try to make it look like they have done something for the people of Trinbago on the eve of a general election, which they know is coming, and they have nothing to show for the last 8 years, and they want to come now and try to make things look good by saddling us with further debt. Mr. President, in 2020, and I know that they love to say, well, we win 2 elections. In 2020, they campaigned on 2 things. 2 things. One, they were going to take a trade union and turn them into a big enterprise, because they promised OWTU the refinery. That fell through. And they say only a PNM government could do that. Only a PNM government could probably pull wool over the eyes of a trade union like that. I could tell you that much. And they campaigned on their management of COVID. And as immediately post-election 2020, we saw the death figures start rising in this country. And so everything that they campaigned on in 2020, they have nothing to campaign on right now. So what they need is a little stash of money that they can access, money that they have very, very timely come to this parliament in anticipation of the mid-year review to bring supplementations so that they could spend in the lead up to a general election. And so we reject this motion. We will not support it. As any person who goes to a financial institution, who goes anywhere, even if you're going by your friend or your family to borrow money, you have to show that you have a track record of responsible spending. You have to show that you have plans for repayment. You have to show that you deserve the ability to borrow money. And this government has not shown any of that, and has not proven any of that to this Senate, please, Mr. President. And so we will not support this motion. I thank you.